Mary Magdalene, a figure surrounded by mysteries, debates, and controversies that span the centuries. Was she merely a devoted follower of Jesus, a saint wronged by history? Or was her portrayal as a sinner a maneuver to hide something much greater? Prepare to dive into an investigation that crosses the ages, involving conspiracy theories and the influence of religious leaders in the construction of Christianity as we know it today. Stay tuned, because the answers may completely change the way you understand this story. The Mary Magdalene of the Gospels, a story of faith and mystery. Imagine walking through the dusty streets of ancient Galilee, surrounded by voices, whispers, and the weight of centuries of tradition. Among the crowd of biblical characters, a woman emerges whose presence transcends the limits of time. Mary Magdalene. In the Gospels, she is one of the closest figures to Jesus, standing out not only for her devotion, but also for her courage in moments of deep pain and triumph. Mary is introduced as the woman from whom Jesus cast out 7 demons, a number that, in Jewish culture, symbolizes fullness or completeness, indicating that her liberation was total and transformative. But what could these demons be? Some interpretations suggest they could be physical or emotional illnesses, or even symbols of social oppressions of the time. Whatever the meaning, what we know is that this encounter marked the beginning of her journey as a faithful disciple, following Jesus with unwavering dedication. In the Gospels, Mary Magdalene is described as one of the women who supported Jesus' ministry with their own resources, something rare in a patriarchal society. This demonstrates not only her independence, but also the trust that Christ himself placed in her and other female followers. This prominent position reaches its peak in crucial moments. She is one of the few who remains at the foot of the cross, witnessing Jesus' death, while many of his disciples fled in fear. And then comes the most powerful moment of her story. On the morning of the resurrection, it is Mary Magdalene who finds the empty tomb. It is to her that the risen Jesus first appears, entrusting her with the mission to announce this transformative news to the other disciples. Think about it. In an era when a woman's testimony was not even accepted in courts, Mary Magdalene was chosen as the first witness of the resurrection. A revolutionary act that elevates her importance in an unquestionable way. But how then did her image transform so much over the centuries? What is the connection between this brave, faithful, and chosen woman and the figure of the repentant prostitute that has become so well known in popular imagination? The answer may be found in historical confusion and the merging of narratives. In the 6th century, Pope Gregory XIII delivered a sermon in which he combined the figure of Mary Magdalene with other women mentioned in the Gospels, including the sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet, and Mary of Bethany, sister of Martha and Lazarus. This unifying interpretation merged distinct stories and generated the stereotype of Mary Magdalene as a sinner, overshadowing her true story. It is curious to think how this association, based on a misinterpretation, has persisted for so long, shaping the perception of millions of people. But why did this happen? Did Mary Magdalene, as an influential woman close to Jesus, represent a threat to the patriarchy of the emerging church? Or was it simply an innocent mistake that gained strength over the centuries? What we know is that this distortion of her image had profound implications, diminishing her leadership position and silencing one of the most significant female roles in Christian history. Revisiting the story of Mary Magdalene is an exercise in historical and spiritual justice. It is an invitation to reflect on how narratives can be manipulated and how, behind every historical figure, there exists a truth richer and more complex than what we have been told. The construction of the sinner image, a historical distortion. Imagine a sermon in the heart of the 6th century in a candlelit church, with worshippers attentive to what seemed like an important revelation. It was in this context that Pope Gregory I, later known as Gregory the Great, uttered words that would forever change the perception of Mary Magdalene. In a speech, he combined 3 distinct female figures from the Gospels. Mary Magdalene, the sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet with perfume, and Mary of Bethany, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. This unifying interpretation was seemingly an error, but it carried much deeper implications. By describing Mary Magdalene as a repentant sinner, Gregory consolidated an image that would endure for centuries. But why was this so impactful? At that time, female figures were often reduced to stereotypes. The pure and virtuous mother, like Mary, the mother of Jesus, or the redeemed sinner, as Mary Magdalene came to be portrayed. Transforming Magdalene into a symbol of repentance offered a female model that served the moral and religious narrative of the church. The woman, even in her fragility and sin, could be saved by faith. But was that all? Many scholars believe there was something more behind this association. Mary Magdalene, as a prominent figure in the Gospels, and someone who received the mission to announce the resurrection, possessed an authority that challenged the patriarchal norms of the time. The early church, in its efforts to structure itself, needed to create clear hierarchies where male power was predominant. Women in leadership or spiritual influence roles were seen as anomalies that needed to be neutralized. By labeling Mary Magdalene as a sinner, her prominent position was weakened. From then on, the church could shape the narrative of a faith led and organized by men. Magdalene, who had once been the first witness of the resurrection and one of Jesus' closest followers, became a symbol of human fragility, redeemed by divine grace, but without the same spiritual prominence. This narrative construction also reflected the values of medieval society. The idea of a strong, independent woman close to Jesus was uncomfortable for a culture where women were relegated to secondary roles. The figure of the redeemed sinner was easier to accept because it reinforced the idea of submission and dependence, elements that sustained both the social and religious order. The impact of this distorted interpretation was profound. For centuries, Mary Magdalene was portrayed in works of art, literature, and sermons as a penitent ex-prostitute. Her true story, as a faithful disciple and witness of the resurrection, was overshadowed by a symbolic construction that served the interests of a male-dominated society. Within this narrative, we encounter important questions. How can history be shaped to serve specific interests? And more importantly, what does this tell us about the figures that have been erased or distorted over time? The rediscovery of the true Mary Magdalene is not only a matter of historical justice, but also an opportunity to reflect on the role of women in faith and society. Saint or conspirator, Mary Magdalene in a new light. Throughout the 20th century, with advances in archaeological research and the rediscovery of ancient texts, such as the Apocryphal Gospels, Mary Magdalene began to emerge in a new way. These documents, many found in places like Nag Hammadi in Egypt, brought to light an alternative narrative, portraying Magdalene not as a repentant sinner, but as a woman of immense knowledge and spirituality. In some passages, she is described as someone who understood the messages of Jesus more deeply than the apostles themselves, positioning her as a leadership figure in the early church. One of these discoveries, the so-called Gospel of Mary, presents Mary Magdalene as a confidant of Jesus, someone who had access to spiritual revelations that the other disciples could not comprehend. This text sheds light on a dynamic of tension between Mary and some apostles, especially Peter, suggesting that her closeness to Jesus and her prominent position caused discomfort. The image that emerges from these writings is not that of a simple follower, but of a leader, perhaps even a figure who challenged the established order within Christ's own circle. With the rise of conspiracy theories in the 20th century, Especially after the success of works like the Da Vinci Code, this view of Mary Magdalene took on even bolder contours. The idea that she may have been Jesus' wife, or that together they had a secret lineage, fascinated millions and reignited the debate over the gaps and silences in traditional biblical narratives. Although these hypotheses lack solid historical basis, they raise an important question. Why does so much information about Mary Magdalene seem to have been omitted or distorted over the centuries? Whether as a spiritual leader, confidant, or something more, the central role of Mary Magdalene challenges the patriarchal structures that have shaped the Church throughout history. Many of these theories suggest that her image was deliberately diminished, perhaps to reinforce an exclusively male model of authority. After all, recognizing Magdalene as equal or superior leadership could have radically transformed the history of Christianity, perhaps with a greater balance between male and female roles in the organization of faith. More than conspiracy theories, these new interpretations lead us to question the reasons why some narratives were privileged and others marginalized. The rediscovery of Mary Magdalene offers us an invitation to reflect on how stories of power, faith, and control are told and retold, shaping not only religion, but our very view of the world. The manipulation of religion for mass control between faith and power. When we analyze the trajectory of Christianity, it becomes evident how faith at various moments in history has been deeply connected to political and social power structures. Mary Magdalene, with her story marked by mysteries and conflicting interpretations, is a clear example of how narratives and religious figures can be shaped to serve the interests of dominant groups. Still, she represents only a piece in a much larger puzzle. In the early centuries of Christianity, the religion faced the challenge of establishing itself in a pluralistic and often hostile world. To ensure its expansion, the Church not only sought new followers, but also constructed an internal order that required leadership and control. In this context, the manipulation of narratives became a crucial tool. Editing stories, silencing characters, or reinterpreting messages were not merely doctrinal issues, but political strategies that guaranteed the consolidation of power. Mary Magdalene, for example, was a figure who questioned male supremacy by representing significant spiritual authority. Had she been recognized as equal or even superior to the apostles, she could have challenged the patriarchal hierarchy being established. The choice to downgrade her to the image of a repentant sinner was, therefore, a way to preserve the dominant structures while maintaining her relevance within an acceptable role for the time. This type of manipulation, however, was not restricted to individual figures. The doctrine itself was often used to support governments, justify wars, and silence dissenting voices. From the alliance of Christianity with the Roman Empire in the 4th century to events like the Crusades and the Inquisition, religion was transformed into an instrument of social control. Verses and sacred passages were conveniently interpreted to maintain inequalities, while religious and political leaders took on the role of mediators between the people and the divine. However, the story of faith is not solely one of oppression. Amid all this, religion also became a force for resistance and transformation. Social justice movements and revolutions throughout the centuries often emerged from religious foundations, challenging the power structures that sought to instrumentalize them. Mary Magdalene, with her devotion and spiritual significance, symbolizes this duality. A figure manipulated by the system, yet one that continues to inspire generations seeking authenticity and truth in spirituality. Today, as we reflect on these events, we realize how faith remains a tool of enormous influence, both to illuminate and to control. Understanding the errors and distortions of the past allows us to avoid repeating them, opening space for a more inclusive and liberating religious experience. Mary Magdalene, even amid the shadow of manipulations, remains a powerful reminder that the truth always finds a way to come to light. Mary Magdalene, a saint, a sinner, or a symbol of something greater that was deliberately distorted. Her story, more than a historical enigma, reflects the challenges and manipulations that shaped Christianity and society as a whole. Now we want to hear from you. What is your opinion on Mary Magdalene? Leave your comments and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel. After all, this is just the tip of the iceberg in our journey through the history of faith and power. In the next video, we will continue the story of Mary Magdalene, unveiling the secrets and conspiracies that surround this important figure in the history of humanity.